Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Gruesome and Grotesque video. Well, I was teasing this earlier today about the sadness and the tragicness associated with the subject matter within this video. This was something that I was actually debating about even doing a video on, but when I came across this information, I just felt I had to share it here in honor and memory of the animal that I'm about to talk about here. Fair warning again, this is truly something that is very, very sad. I'm not kidding when I posted in my earlier comment that it kind of brought me to tears because when I was reading this information, it only got worse and worse, and I'm amazed essentially how this truly happened all those years back. But again, fair warning to everyone out there, and I'll give everyone some pause later on too, a chance to get out of this video, because this is definitely one of the saddest things I've ever seen or read about in my life. But it has to do with this. In fact, you're looking at an image of the elephant that I'll talk about here. She was known as Mary, but also there was another name that was unfortunately tied to her, and that was Murderous Mary. And all that information will be shared here briefly in just a minute as to why that was. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the sad, all the tragic news associated with this wonderful animal. So who was Mary the elephant? Well, she was an elephant that was born sometime in 1894, and then cut to around 4 years later in 1898. She was purchased by Charlie Sparks, or I believe, as I was reading in another article, the father of Charlie Sparks, and they in turn owned a circus show called Sparks World Famous Shows. This was your run-of-the-mill, like Ringling Brothers Circus. Like if you could imagine something like that, that's essentially what this was. And during that time period, it was traveling throughout multiple cities in America, showcasing many animals throughout its shows. In fact, you're seeing some of the posters associated with the show here. All these animals would just perform twice a day, and then they would quickly travel to another town, and then they would just continue with this ad nauseum. I imagine that back then, of course, with everything associated with no laws protecting any kind of animals tied to any kind of shows or performances or circuses, that you must have had some really bad conditions. Although I was reading this in another area that apparently Mary was very well beloved when it came to the show. So in other words, the owner Charlie Sparks and his wife apparently took her and really took care of her, and in turn really took care of some of the animals there. So at least there was that hope when I was reading the information tied to her. But yeah, as far as that time period, she stayed as a performer around 18 years or so. So she was traveling in that area, in that circus, up until around 1916 to be specific, because on a fateful day there in September 1916, here's what occurred. Now, up until that point, Mary was by far the biggest star within the circus show. And when I mean like that, she was literally the biggest star. She was the largest elephant within the show, and I think the largest elephant in America in terms of a performing elephant. She was very popular because she was able to do lots of tricks. She was someone that could throw baseballs, catch baseballs as well. She could stand on her head, interact with other animals, just do a bunch of things that obviously garnered a lot of attention. And so that's why she was always prominently featured, not just within the show itself, but in a lot of publicity leading to the show. Like frequently they would have her, as you see here, placed with some kind of advertisement. And in that way, you couldn't help but notice her when she was placed throughout multiple parts of either a town or someplace else. Still, though, you got to think that with her life basically there within the circus, not free, not roaming about, in other words, that it must have been just bad all around. Like eventually most animals that are in captivity like that, they're not going to be doing so, let's say, out of the goodness of their heart. They'll still have that kind of feeling within them that they're miserable. But either way, though, she was traveling about with the circus, and then on that fateful day, in September 1916, here's what occurred. Apparently, they were going to a place called Kingsport, Tennessee, and while they were there, members of the circus hired a gentleman there that went by the nickname essentially Red. This was someone that was apparently a transient hotel clerk, although I read other places that he was a homeless person altogether. But this guy, his name was Red Eldridge. He was hired to be the assistant to not just Mary, Mary, but I believe most of the other elephants too. I think, in fact, there were a total of 4, maybe 5 elephants that were within that group. And he was basically tied to Mary whenever it came to making sure that she was fed and that she was led around to certain places and stuff like that. Even then, there's still discrepancies as to how Red treated her before the fateful incident. There was one thing that I was reading that stated that Red automatically was just someone that was really mean to her, like poking her, prodding her with this. You're looking at it now. It's called like a bull hook. This is something that just creates instant pain, obviously, whenever it's gouged against someone's hide. And here he was doing so in a way to make sure that he could communicate to her that he was her instant master. There's that part. And then there's another part that I was reading that the people there that were within the circus, in other words, the other performers, that they were teaching Red how to take care of the elephant in a very careful manner. So again, lost in time, there's those two far discrepancies, much like I was mentioning earlier on other discrepancies as well. And even then, I'll talk about more discrepancies here in a minute. So take it as you will when it comes to a grain of salt as far as which side is which. Either way, though, the fateful incident happened here. So on September 12th, that's essentially when he was hired. On September 13th, they were traveling to an area, again, near Kingsport, Tennessee. And as they were doing so, they were being led, the elephants there, along with Red on top of her, were being led on an elephant parade. Apparently, this was a parade where the elephants were intertwined with each other, meaning each one's trunk was holding the other's tail, and they were being led in the town, probably as a way to promote, I would imagine like it was sometime earlier in the day, if the two performances were happening later in the day, as a way to promote the upcoming shows. And so here's what occurred. Apparently, as the elephants were riding in this parade, something caught Mary's attention. This was a watermelon, a piece of watermelon rind that was right there on the ground. And instantly, instinctively, she reached down for it. Well, this guy Red either A, didn't realize that she was reaching down into the ground for that watermelon rind, or B, just didn't care. He wanted to keep her going forward in the parade, so he took this metal hook and then started prodding her. Again, discrepancies range on this. There's one that he was prodding her with all his might, like multiple times, just stabbing her almost to get her to move forward. And then in another one, I was reading that all it took is just one single prod to lead what happened next. Either way, though, Mary the elephant snapped. The way people read it, the eyewitnesses stated afterward, they said that Mary instantly went into a fit of rage. She took this guy, and yet here's another discrepancy again. Either A, she lifted him up with his trunk, pounced him on the ground, and then with full force of her foot, stamped his head, squashed it, basically and ironically like a watermelon, like it was just instant done when it came to the death of Red. In other instances, she either took her giant tusks and again, using her trunk, rammed him to the ground and then impaled him with those tusks, killing him again instantly. And yet in another particular writing that I saw, she took his body and then threw him to the ground and then kicked him with all her might, and he went flying towards the crowd area, again killing him as well. So again, is 3 different discrepancies, but all of them essentially led to his death. And when that happened, the way that people stated that Mary acted afterward, she became calm. That was the one thing that wasn't a discrepancy. Obviously, after that prodding was done, she realized that nothing was needed anymore. Like she didn't need to be in a fit of rage. And when that occurred, she instantly calmed down and was looking about almost in bewilderment as to what occurred. In this case, it was just completely gone for her mind as to what she did. Unfortunately, though, this is where the really, really sad news happens. This crowd that was gathered there, they in turn started to fear and in turn hate what the elephant did. Like it happened within moments. In fact, one of the people there was a blacksmith, a guy by the name of Hench Cox. he took out a shotgun and fired 5 rounds into the elephant. And this was because the crowd there, right at that moment, started to chant. They wanted to kill the elephant for what they saw that she just did. They started chanting, in fact, kill the elephant, let's kill it. And so he took out that shotgun and fired 5 rounds. This did nothing to Mary because of her size, and I don't know if it was the distance as well, wherever this guy Hitchcock's was. But either way, the crowd wanted something done. She just killed someone that was there within the town. I don't even know if this guy Red happened to live there for a long time, or again being described either as a transient, a homeless person, or something else in terms of his stay there. I don't know if he's been there even longer, but they took it very, very personally, and they were out for blood. They wanted to absolutely have something done with regards to Mary and what she did. Not only that, but news spread really, really quick. They were the circus, the Sparks World Famous Circus show was going to be performing there in that town in Kingsport, Tennessee. Well, apparently there was a local town, another one called Irwin, Tennessee, that they were going to perform to the next day. Well, news spread to that town specifically, and they in turn stated that no, they were not going to have this circus show performed there at all unless something was done with Mary. On top of that, too, apparently people within that town were coming over specifically to take care of Mary as well. Like, this was something when I was just baffled at what I was reading when I was reading this information, because here you had not just one but 2 towns that suddenly had this bloodlust when it came to the death of Mary. They absolutely just wanted her killed. And here's where things go even worse as to how this was going to happen. Once it was decided that this was going to be done, and this was only done because the owner, Charlie Sparks, who again either he loved the elephant and absolutely raised it if it was a child of his own, or B, didn't really care about much the elephant or the animals there. Either way, though, he realized that he would have to do something, not only for the sake of his other animals, but also for his business. He had to do something in order to ensure that he could appease the crowd themselves. And so he reluctantly decided, the way I was reading some of the information, that he would give in, that he would allow the animal to be killed. And then here's where things go even more macabre, more sad associated with this. How do you kill a large elephant like Mary? Even guns or gunshots, unless it was a well-placed one, was not able to do anything to her. And so it was debated. The poison was apparently one option, but people realized that elephants would be able to pick, as smart as they are, would be able to pick and choose that, the food that was about to give them was going to be poison or not. And then another thing that was considered was electrocution. There was apparently a precedent on this a couple of years back, where another elephant who went on a rampage was killed by electrocution. And so that was one area that they were seeking. But the problem, though, was the way that they were going to set this up. They wanted to do it quickly, and that wasn't going to work. And then even more macabre was tying Mary not just to a train, but having her split apart. Like, in other words, have one end, her trunk, let's say, placed on one side of the train, and then the foot, like let's say the back foot, placed on another train. And as they separated, it would have ripped her apart. Gruesome, isn't it, when it comes to that stuff, that this was even considered when it came to Mary. And then yet another area was this, having her essentially hanged. And that's what ended up happening, having her hanged, and then that would be the decision. So maybe that was going to be the most humane way that was considered by the crowd, at least when it came to their bloodlust. Maybe that was the most humane way considered by this guy, Charlie Sparks. Either way, though, nobody dared consider the whereabouts, why Mary did this. Nobody looked into why she would suddenly snap like this and cause this kind of murderous quote-unquote rampage when obviously something else was the true factor, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Nobody ever considered that when it came to this poor animal. All they were thinking about was, again, the multiple ways that she was going to be killed. Can you believe this, too? Another one that was debated on was having Mary placed in the middle of 2 trains, and then having those 2 trains come together and basically crushing her right there. Just just it's just amazing again that this kind of stuff was even considered. But yes, as she was decided, in other words, she was decided to be hanged, she was placed next to a jail, chained next to a jail. And the way I was reading the information, this poor animal, Mary, who by that point was nicknamed Murderous Mary, that's essentially where the name comes from. That night she had visitors pretty much all throughout the night. People there from that town, and imagine nearby, were coming forward to take a look at her, to look at this rampaging, murderous Mary. Apparently, people stated that she was shivering with fright because of what occurred. Like elephants are smart. She was realizing that she was in a bad situation, and all these people that were there were just almost staring at her, probably, let's say, in a quiet manner. Nobody really helping to do anything towards her, but she knew that something was going to happen soon. And so the next day, reluctantly again by Charlie Sparks and then the people there within the show, they took Mary and the show over to Irwin, Tennessee, and that's where they had this set up. You're looking at it now. This was the actual crane that was used in her hanging. It was decided they needed something very large, very powerful in order to do so because of the weight associated with this creature. This was apparently, Mary was someone that, an elephant that weighed over 5 tons, so they needed something to be able to lift her up. And so they used this crane to do so. And then here's where things turn even worse. Remember, this is not a happy story. This is not something that's going to be that's going to have a happy ending. That's why I'm going to give now a good maybe 10 seconds or so. If anyone wants to bail out right now, please do so. I did this with one of my other videos as well about the poor gentleman again that went into that cave and never came out alive. So I'm going to give everyone 10 seconds starting now to be able to again bail out. This is your last chance. All right, so if you're still here, then again, take this. I had to share this because this is a piece of history. I'm not sharing this because of the gruesomeness associated with this. No, I'm sharing this because, again, I wanted to do this in memory of Mary and the tribulations that she went through. So she was taken along with the other elephants in a formation again, involving the trunks and then involving the tails. They were taken to this area, and then Mary was led to the crane, and apparently she was still shivering in fright throughout the entire experience. She knew what was up. Apparently the owner there, Charlie Sparks, purposely brought the other elephants to try to calm her down, because she didn't want to just experience this by herself. It was almost like a way, the way I was reading it, it was almost like a way, again, to have her be close to her quote-unquote family, to ensure that she would at least have, if you call it that, a best experience possible before her death. So she was taken to the crane, and then, not knowing, of course, what would happen, she allowed this crane to have a giant chain hooked around her head. And there's discrepancy on this next part. Either to ensure that she would not escape, there was a second chain that was attached to her leg that was also attached to the ground, or attached to the crane somewhere on the ground as well. Or in other parts, that chain didn't exist at all, the one that was by her leg. Either way, though, that's another form of discrepancy. But then it happened, once the chain was wrapped around her neck, she was lifted up. She was lifted up by this giant crane, and she was hung. The only thing, though, was this: they didn't take into account the crane would do enough of the job to lift her, and as far as the weight of herself, it was more than enough, it was less than enough to handle it, but they didn't take into account, apparently, the chain that was used. And so she was hung there for at least maybe 5-6 seconds, obviously now realizing what was occurring, and then the chain snapped. And then when that happened, she was already a big height in this, in terms of the difference of the ground, and she fell in a manner where she actually broke her hip. When I read that information, it was again bringing me almost to tears as to what was occurring. Here she was already realizing, when she was being led there to that crane, that she was in a bad spot, shivering with fright, even allowing the rest of the people there to hang this chain around her. And then when it lifted her, there she was struggling, panicking, and then it snapped, and then it broke her hip. When she landed on the ground, her hip broke because of the impact. On top of that, remember I was mentioning earlier that there's discrepancy about about that other chain that was tied to her leg. If that was there, some reports that I was reading stated that this leg caused her leg to snap as well. Like people forgot, oops, there was that chain that was tied to her leg, and so that led to further issues. But either way, though, the big thing was the chain snapped, she fell to the ground, and she broke her hip. There she was, writhing in pain now, obviously, knowing what was going on to a further point, and she still wasn't in a vengeful mood. She wasn't murderous. She wasn't anything that these town people were now calling this poor animal. She allowed, yet again, the chain to be wrapped around her. This time it was placed in yet another manner, one to make sure that this crane would truly pick her up and hold her there. And it happened again. The chain was lifted, the crane was lifted, and she was picked up. And this time she was left there in the air, grasping, producing some kind of awful, awful sounds that I'm so glad I was not there to be able to hear it. But the crowd was there, and apparently, according to some articles I was reading, they were cheering almost at what was occurring because of the incident. There were even children there, if you could believe this nonsense. There were children that were there witnessing this event because of the attraction that it produced. So there she was, writhing in pain. Some of the other elephants that were there obviously were seeing all this too. She was shrieking, and then within a few minutes she was dead. She was actually 100% dead because she was hung by that crane. So when that happened, she was actually left there another 30 minutes, the way I was reading this information, just to make sure again that this was 100% done as to her execution. There was a veterinarian that was brought out, and he examined her, and he produced that yes, she was dead. And then that's when she was laid to the ground. And then that's where the unfortunate twist comes. As they were inspecting her again to make sure that she was dead or looking her over, that's when they noticed this. Apparently she had a large infected tooth near her mouth area, and the way that it was described was this was the same location that this guy Red Eldridge was poking earlier with the bull hook. So everyone deduced right there that when he was poking her there, he inadvertently poked that infected area, and that caused that spot there to just make her snap. Remember, she was performing for 18 years earlier, and she was doing so in a perfect manner. But now this one incident, one single poke, caused her to just snap and then kill that guy Red. As it turns out, it was all because of that severely infected tooth. That's all it took, one specific spot, and then that's what led to her death afterward. When I read that too, I was like, oh my God, that if things couldn't turn any worse, they just did, because basically she was innocently killed. There she was. Obviously, like, the death of a circus animal like this is bad, but the fact that it made it seem like she just snapped on her own, when it turns out that it was all due because of her own infected tooth and this guy Red just poking her in that spot, that just made things all the worse. But it was too late. She was clearly dead by that point. And the way I was reading this information, this area that she was in was some kind of railroad yard. It was called Clinchfield Railroad Yard. She was buried there. In fact, there was a giant grave that was built for her, and then she was buried, but it was unmarked. And so when I was trying to find information as to where she's buried there specifically, because if I ever go by that area, I just have to it would be one of my stops. I would have to make sure that I would go there and pay tribute, in other words, to this beautiful animal. But apparently it was unmarked. And to this day, it's still there. Like, in other words, the grave of Mary, this beautiful animal, is still there, but no one knows exactly where it is, nor, as I was reading one information there, the town ain't exactly too high on, let's say, trying to make sure that people could find it because of the bad history that obviously this got afterward. And so somewhere there in that location, that's where Mary, this beautiful animal, Murderous Mary, as others called her during that time period, that's where she's buried. So if there's any consolation to this, it's that her severe pain, everything was ended, hopefully as quickly as possible, and then that's where she is buried to this day. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information that I could find as to this very, very set of tragic circumstances. Like, this was just something really bad all around. Here was this beautiful animal that, again, at a young age, was entered into the circus life, and for all intents and purposes, either A, she was treated well and everything was going good, or she was treated bad the whole way. But on that fateful day with this guy Red, who I don't know if, because again, based on several different areas, either A, he was someone that was just poking and prodding her really, really bad, or B, just happened to hit the wrong spot because he was again trained to be careful and be very mindful of these animals and to treat them well. Either way, though, it just led to that one spot, and then that led to his death, which led to her death afterward. This town, by the way, too, you're looking at an area, some pictures too. They have dedicated much stuff to Mary. After all these years, of course, this story has taken on a whole life of its own. Poems have been made about Mary. Songs have been made about Mary as well. Other types of productions like plays I was reading too have been made about Mary and what occurred. This town has dedicated several parades into the memory of Mary to ensure that she's able to be told in a more peaceful manner afterward because of her unfortunate death. So at least I was satisfied to hear that that's the case there. But again, that's all the information that I could find, all the tragic news that I could find associated this with Mary the Elephant, Murderous Mary, again, as she was described within that town. But if anyone has any more information, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. Anybody there from that area in Tennessee, maybe in the Irwin, Tennessee area that knows more info, maybe even knows where the burial site is of Mary. If so, please post those comments too. So, all right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care.